So family and friends, GNX was released over a week ago at this point. So today we got all the first week sales data for it and all the different Billboard records that Kendrick broke. And boy, is there a lot of them. So we're going to break it all down. Was this Kendrick's highest selling album in the first week? Did he beat out Drake's first week sales? Was he expected to sell more? Well, we're going to cover all that in this video. But if you're new to the channel, I'm not asking you to subscribe just yet, but if you could drop a like, that would be great. I will repay you by glazing Kendrick in many more videos in the future. I'm kidding. We're actually going to do the opposite in this video and glaze Kendrick's big three counterpart, not Drake, but funny enough, J. Cole. See, Kendrick opened up the first week of GNX by selling 319,000 copies, which is monstrous. It's the second highest first week album sales for a hip-hop album this year, second to Travis Scott, who sold a bunch of bundles with his 2014 re-released mixtape Days Before Rodeo. But this was a massive accomplishment. It was a surprise drop. No one knew about it. It was only 12 tracks, and the way that we count sales data, aside from people actually buying physical copies of the album, is however many streams all of the songs get, they're basically all added up to calculate the first week sales, and 1,500 streams is equal to one album sale. So naturally, the more songs your album has, the easier it is to have high album sales. It's like a cheat code. That's why you see Drake bloat his albums with 25 tracks. I think on one of his albums, he even had a happy birthday song. But yeah, it's a cheat code basically. Chris Brown once dropped like a 45 song album, but obviously Kendrick's number one priority wasn't to get those high record sales, so he only dropped a 12-track album, which makes it harder to sell a higher amount, and we're going to touch on why that's important later on. But for context, Drake's most recent album, For All the Dogs, sold about 404,000 copies in the first week. That's about 25% higher than what Kendrick just sold in the first week on GNX. However, that album had about 23 tracks. This one only had 12. So he had over 90% more songs than Kendrick did on his album. So 90% more songs, but only 27% higher album sales. You can see that if Kendrick put more records on this album, he would easily have a higher first week. But what's very interesting is I want to note, Mr. We're the Big Three, like we started a league, J. Cole, he's not to be messed with, man. A lot of you guys were upset at me because when he came out with Port Antonio and he was saying, like, I didn't lose a battle, I lost a bro, I was like, we kind of owe J. Cole an apology. Like, he just did what he felt was right in his heart. And yeah, it was a bit of a weak move, but he's still a GOAT. And his numbers are not to be messed with. I'm actually going to do a full breakdown. He just dropped a new podcast where he touches on the making of all of his different mixtapes and albums early on in his career and how his label was so desperate for him to have a big hit before he put albums out, because Drake came out around the same time as him and he was just putting out massive albums, massive hits right out the gate. J. Cole was more of an underground artist at the time, so he was really searching for that hit. And he talked about in the podcast when Kendrick dropped Good Kid, Mad City and blew his sales numbers out of the water, J. Cole really felt threatened, and Kendrick came out after J. Cole and he was still doing bigger first week sales numbers. Good Kid, Mad City had all that commercial and critical praise, and J. Cole kind of felt threatened by it. I'm going to do a whole breakdown of that, but why I bring up J. Cole is because in 2021, he dropped a 12-track album as well. One of the best albums, in my opinion, of the 2020s decade with The Off Season. It was a short album, so again, it's susceptible to not having high first week sales because of its short track list. But with just 12 tracks, J. Cole still opened up in his first week selling 282,000 copies. Only 37,000 less copies than Kendrick did with GNX, with the same amount of tracks. And when you think about it in retrospect, this was the most hype, in my opinion, Kendrick had coming into an album than he ever had throughout his entire career. So for him to only sell 37,000 copies more than J. Cole did when J. Cole dropped not necessarily a throwaway album, but everyone was expecting the fall off. He came with this short little off-season album. It also didn't have much promotion in it. I think he released one song before the album. So I say all that to say, with him doing those numbers with a lot less hype than Kendrick had now, but with the same amount of tracks, it does speak to how much of a dominant force J. Cole is within hip-hop. I don't know if anyone's necessarily questioning that, but he's always talking about how he's in the third place of that big three, or how people perceive him to be in that third place. But he's still out here doing numbers, man. And I know he dropped a little project this year too, and that one only sold around 115,000 copies in the first week, mainly because people had mixed reactions to his diss track that was on the album, 7-Minute Drill, that he quickly deleted off the album about a week after it was released. But I think with more hype, maybe a single release before the album, J. Cole is definitely capable of at least being in the third place in terms of highest selling rappers in this era. I know you have guys like Tyler, the Creator, and Travis Scott, who always have massive sales weeks, largely due to the fact that they always come out with creative merchandise and vinyls for their albums, which boost the numbers up big time. But I saw a lot of talk of J. Cole falling off after dropping out of this beef, Tyler, the Creator, replacing him in that big three. So I just wanted to remind everyone that with a lot less hype than Kendrick had with GNX and with the same amount of tracks, he was still able to sell almost the same amount that Kendrick was in the first week with the offseason. Another 12-track album that actually sold a lot less than GNX was Drake's 2022 release, Honestly Nevermind. I know this wasn't a hip-hop album, it was a dance album, but it did have that track Jimmy Cooks with 21 Savage, which was very much a hip-hop song, a massive song at that. It was also a surprise release, but it had massive songs like Massive and Sticky. So it kind of shows that when both artists put out surprise drops, Kendrick and Drake, Kendrick is outselling Drake in that regard. Kendrick did again about 319. Drake did about 202,000 copies with Honestly Nevermind. And Drake seemed to be trolling the GNX album recently in a live stream when, if you guys don't know, obviously the iconic mustard line that Kendrick yells on TV off, Drake in the comments of Los Pollos stream, he commented, "Custard." And then he said,
"We need a donut emoji in the chat. Custard."
Now, let's talk about a couple records Kendrick broke with this album. So, firstly, this year alone, what a massive year for Kendrick. One of the greatest years for any rapper in general. Yes, I know there was Lil Wayne in 2008, or Eminem in 2002, or 50 Cent in, I think it was 2003 or 2004, or Tupac in 1996. I'm not saying this is the biggest year ever for a rapper, but it's definitely up there. And no sign points to it more than this. Kendrick Lamar becomes the first hip-hop artist to debut 3 songs at #1 in any calendar year in Hot 100 history. Now that means that he is the first rapper ever to have 3 songs jump to the top of the Billboard chart in their first week. And this is a common thing in the streaming era. Like, it's very easy. Well, not easy, but they've made it a lot easier to debut at #1 with the song, because it used to be that radio accounted for a lot of the points that songs got on the charts, and it took a lot longer for songs to climb up the rankings at radio. It took like weeks or months. So with streaming now making up a bigger percentage of what goes into making a song a hit, a lot of people can just listen to it heavily in that first week when it first comes out, making it shoot up to #1 in its first week, but then people lose interest in it and it quickly falls off the charts. We've seen this a lot with Drake, and Billboard actually recently came out with their own little massive, really not little, roast against Drake, which I'm going to read to you guys later in this video. But this is a common thing with Drake. Drake has the most #1s out of any hip-hop artist. I believe it's around 14 #1 hits, but a lot of them are just #1 because there was a lot of hype for them in the first week, and then they quickly fall off the charts. Songs like Slime You Out, Tootsie Slide, What's Next, First Person Shooter, to an extent, all these songs debuted at #1 on the charts, but then quickly fell off. People weren't listening to them in the long term. But Kendrick's 3 #1 hits, Like That, Not Like Us, and now Squabble Up, it's too early to tell with Squabble Up, but the other 2 hits have had massive staying power. They've been on the charts for the whole year. They're still on the charts. Like, these are genuine hits. And you could say, oh, but, you know, they're just hits because he was dissing Drake on them. But now look at Squabble Up. And Squabble Up is likely to fall to either #3 or #4 on next week's chart. And what's going to replace it will likely be Kendrick's song TV Off, as that has become a bigger hit off the album. So who knows, before the year ends, he might break his own record and become the first rapper to have 4 songs debut at #1 on the Billboard charts. Now, in terms of the Billboard charts, Kendrick had all 5 positions of the top 5 occupied with GNX records. Squabble Up was #1, TV Off was #2, and I really think that's going to hit #1 either next week or the week after. Luther was #3. That's also going to be a massive hit for him. Whacked Out Murals was #4. That's the intro track. Hey Now, which is my personal favorite off this album right now, that was at #5. At #8, we had Reincarnated. #9 was Man at the Garden. So he placed 7 out of the 10 spots in the top 10 with GNX records. And after that, we had Dodger Blue at #11, Peekaboo at 13. That's also a super underrated cut off the album, in my opinion. The Heart Part 6 was at number 14, and that's not the Drake version. The title track GNX was at number 24, which is a lot of people's least favorite record off the album, but I keep going back to it, man. I love Pitted J3's verse. The beat is all trippy, it's aggressive. Kendrick comes in with this goofy chorus. Like, I don't know, I keep bumping this in the car, and like, it's super quotable. Like, the whole
I'm tripping and I'm loving it.
Tell 'em Rapaholics did it.
I don't know, man. I love that record. And then the lowest charting song off this album was the outro track, Gloria. Now, likely this song was the lowest charting track off the album just because it was the last song off the album, but this could be one of the best songs off the album. His dynamic with SZA, it's beautiful. Everything about this record is beautiful. So you could say I'm glazing and I'm loving it, but tell 'em Rapaholics did it. At number 30 on the Billboard Hot 100, we still have Not Like Us. It was at 19 last week, so still in the top 40. Last week it was in the top 20. People are still bumping this song, man. It's a genuine hit. But let's talk about the streams for GNX, because again, it was a small album. Obviously, it made a massive impact on the Billboard charts, occupied the whole top 5 of this week's chart. And if you look, GNX was actually the 9th biggest opening week for streams of a rap album in US history. And all of these albums have over 15 tracks. This is the highest opening streaming week for a rap album with under 15 tracks in history. Like, if he gave us 15 to 20 tracks off this album, it would no doubt be one of the highest streamed albums of all time in its opening week. It earned 379 million streams in its first week, beating out Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, which was almost double the size in terms of track list. Mr. Morale only got 343 million streams in the first week. Someone pointed out something interesting in that Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers was Kendrick's last album on the TDE label. And if you look, both Punch and Top Dog from TDE, they're usually very vocal on Twitter. They've been, very vocal, especially throughout this beef. If you look up their tweets from the release month of Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, they actually didn't tweet out a single thing about that album, and that was his last album on the label. But now with GNX, they're tweeting out a bunch about it, promoting it, praising it. So who knows what was going on when Kendrick was leaving the label, but obviously they're on great terms now. He only got 135 less streams than Drake did with For All the Dogs in its first week, and again, that album was double in size. Drake holds all the top 4 highest opening streaming weeks for rap albums in history, with Scorpion at number 1, 746 million streams in the first week. Then you had CLB, then For All the Dogs, then Her Loss. Then, funny enough, it was Lil Wayne's The Carter 5 with 433 million streams in the first week. So shout out to Weezy, he's still the GOAT, but I don't think he wants any smoke with Kendrick in a rap battle. But yeah, again, man, J. Cole with the same amount of tracks only did about 50 million less streams with the off season in its first week than GNX did. But GNX did beat out massive albums like Donda, Astroworld, Utopia, even Damn, several Drake albums like Honestly Nevermind, Views, Dark Lane demo tapes. So again, for the amount of tracks that this album had, it was definitely a massive W in terms of streaming numbers. This was also the most amount of songs that Kendrick debuted in the top 10 of the Billboard chart simultaneously with an album. Again, he had 7 records off GNX in the top 10 this week. The only one to beat him is Drake, with Certified Lover Boy having 9 out of the 10 spots of the top 10 when it first released. Her Loss had 8 out of the top 10 spots. For All the Dogs, surprisingly, only had 7. Scorpion only had 7. We Don't Trust You this year had 5 out of the top 10 slots of the Billboard charts occupied in its first week. That was a massive album this year. I'd be surprised if it doesn't take home the Grammy for Rap Album of the Year. The offseason too, man, you can't deny J. Cole's star power. When he released that album, he had 5 records in the top 10 of the Billboard charts when it first came out. And interestingly enough, regardless of the big month that Kendrick had in November with the new release of this album, Drake still beat him out for being the most streamed rapper of November 2024 with 1.08 billion streams this month. Kendrick had 1.0 billion streams this month. And with Drake, it's a lot of his older records that are getting streamed highly and carrying him. Like, if you count everything released past 2017, I think Kendrick would be beating him in this category. And in December, it's going to be interesting to see if Kendrick finally beats Drake out for this title, because a lot of Drake fans have been using this as ammo to say, oh, Drake didn't fall off because he's still constantly the most streamed rapper on Spotify every single month. But you have to take into account how massive his back catalog is and how much old music he has that's still doing numbers. Kendrick has probably about 25% of the amount of music Drake has, but he's still almost doing the same amount of streams per month. And with the success of this album in December, it's going to be interesting to see if he ends up outstreaming Drake. And remember how I said how 2024 was massive for Kendrick, how he had 3 number 1 records this year? Well, obviously he broke the record of having 3 songs actually debut at the top of the charts. But the only other rapper in history to have 3 number 1 songs in the same calendar year would be Kendrick and Drake. Drake's songs didn't debut at the top of the charts like Kendrick's did, but in 2018, he had 3 number 1 hits, God's Plan, In My Feelings, and Nice for What. Kendrick this year had Like That, Not Like Us, and Squabble Up. We'll see if he beats Drake's record by having a 4th number 1 hit if TV Off ends up replacing Squabble Up at the top of the Billboard charts. And like Hip Hop All Day said, man, in honor of them both holding that record, I think they owe us a little collaboration to celebrate. And Kendrick is starting December off strong. In terms of the rappers getting the most amount of daily streams at the start of December, Kendrick had 53.2 million streams so far this month, and Drake only had 36.4. So if Kendrick is going to beat out Drake in any month for being the most streamed rapper, it's going to be this month. Now, aside from sharing Drake's record of having 3 number 1 singles in 1 calendar year, he also shares Drake's record of being the 2nd rapper to occupy the entire top 5 of the Billboard charts. Squabble Up is Kendrick's 5th number 1 hit on the Billboard charts. His first one was Bad Blood with Taylor Swift. Then you had Humble in 2017. Then you had, obviously this year, the 3 records Not Like Us, Like That with Future Metro Boomin, and now Squabble Up. Drake holds the record for having the most number 1 hits on the Billboard chart in terms of any other rapper. Kendrick, Kanye West, Eminem, Cardi B, and surprisingly Ludacris are all tied behind Drake at number 2, each of them having 5 number 1 hits. Drake has 14. And again, it's very easy in the streaming era, or at least a lot easier, to debut at number 1. That's where a lot of these number 1s came from for Drake. And I'm not coping. Like, this is definitely, he's the most successful rapper in terms of commercial success out of any other rapper in history. But Billboard did roast him for this, so we're going to read what they said very shortly, but just got to give a little love to Ludacris beforehand. If you guys weren't around in the, mid 2000s era, Ludacris was absolutely killing it. Songs like Stand Up, Roll Out, What's Your Fantasy, Act a Fool. Like, I was 6 years old in diapers dancing to Ludacris. Actually, I don't know if I was in diapers, but before he was in movies, he was killing it in the rap game. Doesn't get enough love. But yeah, again, Drake is the rapper with the most number 1s in Billboard history. And he was recently ranked by Billboard as the 4th biggest pop star of the 21st century. He was behind Rihanna at number 3, Taylor Swift at number 2, and then Beyonce at number 1. Many people were wondering, Rihanna hasn't released an album in years. Why is Drake behind her when he's been killing it in the streaming era? And I mean, me personally, I think Rihanna deserves the spot above Drake. And obviously so does Billboard, because they said this, which is hilarious. Anytime these people are together, Rihanna looks like the most glamorous and desirable woman on planet Earth, and Drake looks like a simp. Rihanna is always burnt into your brain, like she's Cleopatra of the 21st century music. Drake has 13 number 1s, but his first 2 number 1 hits are What's My Name and Work. Those are not Rihanna's first 2 number 1 hits. Those are her 8th and 14th. She's like, here's my Canadian friend. Have a couple of my number 1 hits on me. 14 number 1 hits. That's more than Drake has in his entire career. Side note, Billboard, it's actually not more than Drake has in his entire career. Sicko Mode is his 14th number 1 hit, but he wasn't credited for it since he wasn't a featured artist on the Astroworld tracklist, but that is his number 1 hit. But they kept going by saying by the time Drake started racking up these number 1 hits as a lead artist, Rihanna was gone. She's like, I'm done with the game. She has the most number 1s this century. She's been innovative. None of Rihanna's number 1s are cheap number 1s. A lot of Drake's number 1s are racked up in the streaming era when he can debut at number 1, but it slowly slides down. Rihanna never had that advantage. She had to build up to a number 1 hit, and it became the number 1 biggest hit of the decade. I don't think there's any of the 14 number 1s that she has that you would say, I don't remember that one. And that's what I was saying earlier, right? Like back in the day, to get that number 1 spot on the Billboard charts, you had to be playing on the radio all the time. Your song had to always be on radio. You had to be selling high on iTunes. People had to be watching the hell out of your music videos back in the Vivo days. Drop a comment if you remember Vivo. But yeah, it was very rare, if it ever happened, that songs would just top the charts right in their first week of release. But that all changed when streaming came around, because now you could just listen to a song over and over again, and the more streams it gets, the more likely it is to debut high on the Billboard charts. That's where a lot of Drake's number 1 hits came from. Tootsie Slide, What's Next, Slime You Out, Way Too Sexy. Like, these songs likely would not have gotten to #1 on the Billboard charts if they were relying on radio play like most of Rihanna's hits were back in the day. Drake also only started hitting the #1 on the Billboard charts all the way in 2016, about 7 years into his career, his first one being with One Dance. His chart-topping success is largely attributed to him being massive on streaming platforms and not really being a radio artist, but I just thought it was hilarious, man. Like, even Billboard is jumping into this beef, even after naming him the 4th biggest pop star of the 21st century and giving him Artist of the Decade way back in 2019. They still had to throw a bunch of shots at him, saying he was like hiding behind Rihanna like a simp, and she was just throwing him these #1 hits like it was like donations to charity. I mean, they better watch out before he sues them too. But yeah, man, all in all, GNX was a massive success on the Billboard charts. It was a very small track list, so with what he was working with, he did a great job in terms of the numbers. Initially, he was actually only projected to do about 280,000 in the first week, and it ended up getting boosted over 40,000 to 320,000 in the first week. Many people are saying that's due to the hype that Drake brought to it himself by suing UMG for their promotion of Not Like Us. I have a whole breakdown on that on the channel, so check it out. It's projected to do around 160,000 in the second week, which is very strong. It means it's holding up on the charts. People are still bumping it. I know I'm still bumping it. Let me know if you guys are. Taylor Swift is, funny enough, going to beat him out for the #1 spot on the Billboard charts next week. Her album, she shipped a bunch of finals for Black Friday, and she's going to hit that #1. But this was a great success and a great album. I can't stop listening to it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Kendrick flopped? Should he have sold more? Or was this a massive W? Is it weird that he only sold a couple dozen thousand more than J. Cole did in the first week with the same number of tracks on the album? Do you forgive J. Cole for begging for forgiveness from Kendrick? Let me know in the comments, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.
There's a lot of little nuggets in both of their disses that if it wasn't for these breakdowns, and salute to, guys like this, Rapaholics, because I think they directly get it.